we still have to make money or produce food off that. So therefore, it's always to one degree or another going to be constrained. So I guess the trouble with conventional modern ag is that we've got almost down to a very, very thin knife.
G'day and welcome to the Farms Advice podcast with your host, Jack Creswell. Whether you farm it, service it, or just love it, this podcast is for you. We'll bring you the techniques and technologies you can implement into your day straight from the leaders and innovators themselves. Spread the Farms Advice so that we can reach more farmers right across Australia. Follow us on all of your socials at Farms Advice, and let's get into this episode. Well, welcome to the Farms Advice podcast. Bruce Maynard, great to have you in the studio as the 2022 Bob Hawke Award winner. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
And it's great to see, and it's also good to see these award winners after their hard years of work. It's not overnight success, is it? As you may know, it doesn't happen overnight, these type of things.
No, indeed. There's a fair few hard yards, but also I very much want to reflect that my journey has not been as an individual. There's so many people have contributed along the way with knowledge, skills, support, and encouragement. So that's really, hopefully, everybody that has assisted in one way or another feels it's partly their award as well.
Yeah, amazing. And you wouldn't be able to do it without the community behind you as well, and also the team on farm there for you. But Bruce, before we get down to a little bit about the award and how you got to where you are currently, just give us a little bit about your connection to agriculture and your background.
Yes, I'm a fourth generation farmer in central west New South Wales, between Narromine and Trangie. So that's approximately 1 hour's drive from Dubbo, about 5.5 hours drive from Sydney. Out in our part of the world, it's fairly flat topography, and traditionally was a mixed cropping zone, and now it's gone less livestock in this area. We've changed our operations to head towards making it a more complex grassland, shrubland, open woodland. So trying to replicate more of what it may have been like prior to agricultural settlement, but all the while trying to retain a practical and profitable business.
Yeah, right. So stripping it back a little bit, where did it all start for you? Your fourth generation on farm. This farm has been in the family for a while?
Yes, indeed. And so, I guess I've often asked about, well, what's the motivations? And always it's got to be a combination of heart and head, I think. And so the heart was always interested in nature and natural things and the complexity there. And but then the head part was growing up in a period and coming back to the farm after school and so forth when things were quite difficult. So late 80s, early 90s, a lot of squeeze on there financially, and we had to work our way forward out of that. One small but really important part of my journey was going away to the United States as a Rotary Youth Exchange for a full year. Immediately after school, and at that time they were suffering similar sorts of squeezes, even though they had at their disposal, where I lived in southern Minnesota, many of the factors that here we usually said, if only we had reliable rainfall or better soils or government support and so forth. So with all of that in mind, it was so interesting to see at that stage that the rate of farmer removal out of agriculture at that point was greater there than here. So that was a bit of a structural point for me to think about. It's the structures we put in place and our long-term guardrails, if you like, of where we're headed, determine a lot of our outward results.
Do you think that comes back to the appeal of what a farm is, the workload, saying that in America that the turnover of farmers getting out of agriculture was quite high in comparison to Australia anyway? Do you think that's the appeal, and you like bringing it back to nature, maybe less stress on yourself, less stress on the stock, your soils? Does it come back to that sort of paradigm?
Yes, I think that's one of the drivers, and all the while we have to keep it real in the, if you like, in the sensible centre, and it's got to be practical, logistically, and reasonably for the people starting in it, because each operation is so different. It is with the people where we always should start, because what do they want out of their situation? They're the ones that are going to have to do the hard yards each day, and that's where, over the years, I think standard approaches and conventional agriculture have swayed away and had, if you like, just an overriding goal on economics, rather than seeing it that economics and finance are actually the means towards our end rather than the end themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, keep it real, but let's aim for what we really actually want in our communities and our farms, and head for that.
Definitely. I think correlating the two with profitability and sustainability can run together, and some think it just sort of has a bad crossover where one drops off and one gains. But what you're doing, remaining profitable, and also the greater outlook of where we're attracting younger farmers that come in, or even new entrants into the market. They could be 50-year-olds, and seeing a career change just to see, is it profitable and is it sustainable, and giving back to our soil, our communities, which probably more so everyone's looking at a little bit more, aren't they?
Indeed, yes, and sometimes there's the that dichotomy that you suggested that people will put forward. You know, you can't be green if you're in the red type saying, and that sort of thing is actually missing the point that since the Second World War, there's actually been an acceleration of negative trends in our agriculture in general, and profitability has gone down. The number of people in rural communities has gone down, and our environmental landscapes have gone down measurably. So all of those trends heading that way. What's gone up? And certainly two very large factors have gone up, and that is productivity and inputs. So those trends, if we don't shape for something else, well, we're going to keep on receiving those trends. So once again, we must ensure that like treating fire, that it's a wonderful servant but a terrible master. That's the way we need to look at our farming systems, which serve us all.
Yeah, exactly. So a great background there and leading in. Do you think if you didn't go to Minnesota with the Rotary for that year, your avenue now, you'd be a little bit different?
Oh, certainly. I think I've had a very, very fortunate life, and that's just one of the many examples where a great deal of generosity has been given to me, and I've been the recipient of that in so many ways. And because genuinely, most people would like to share their knowledge and wisdom, especially if they've been at any tasks for a very long time, and really, trying your best to be open to all of that is very, very useful. There's always something to be learned. It doesn't matter whose place you go to, even if they're not necessarily the best performers by any measure on their property. There's always something that they're doing better than everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's landed you in the sweet spot of where you are today. Just like many other farmers out there, you're pretty humble about being the prestigious Bob Hawke Award winner within Landcare Australia. But what I want to know is, in a sentence or two, what does Landcare mean to you initially?
Community, Jack, and grassroots, and from an organisation and a movement driven from the bottom up, and the fact that it's still going 3 and a bit decades after it first really kicked off is a great testament that it still has at its heart that community.
Beautifully put. And now we'll just get into a little bit about your operations and open the can of worms, and hopefully those worms are in the soil, and see how it all gets on where you are. So what's your operation look like, and what did it look like, and how have you sort of translated it into a sustainable sort of farm that you, on the back end of winning the Landcare Award?
Indeed, yes. So it has been a about 35-year journey. So a lot of major changes, plenty of minor ones. What we've sought to do is is try our best to be pretty good implementers of good ideas, as well as coming up with some innovations of our own. So if you'd come and seen us in about 1990, you would have found us having a 7-year rotation of 4 years lucerne, 3 years cereal cropping, doing direct drilling as our crop establishment there. So that's just one pass, but full soil turnover in sowing our crops. Minimal amounts of pesticides, not any summer fallow, but lots of livestock, so predominantly sheep in those days. But with our soil surface, if you looked at a lot of it at that point in time, very hard and hard set, and even though we were trying to implement what was best practice suggestions of those times, we could see and feel that the trend was not good. So that was where we changed from. If you come to our place now, you'll find every paddock is a mixed grassland on the base layer, and then we have planted over 350,000 shrubs and 200,000 trees in the period of time, and continue to try and add to the diversity. So nowadays it's a very diverse looking outlook, and more interesting because of that. And pleasingly, my 3 children are looking to be involved in the business in one way or shape going forward.
Beautiful. And just sort of breaking down the systems, looking at I saw you on TV the other day talking about your no-kill cropping system and how that's working out for you, reducing probably your impact across each paddock and seeing how you can improve that, and also run it alongside the native grasses, pastures that you've sown in as well. Talk to us a little bit about the no-kill cropping system that you implemented.
Yes, Jack, it's one of the things that we have innovated, and it sits a little bit separate on the family tree of cropping systems, in that it uses complexity and complementarity as the drivers of production rather than simplification. So standard broadacre crops and cropping systems rely on usually simplifying, taking out as many competitors to the plant that you're planting, and then getting the maximum yield. And that is effective as far as maximum yield goes. However, though, there are some downsides to that. Of course, it takes out essentially almost all the biodiversity. We're talking in those modern conventional paddocks, they're mostly a desert most of the year. For a period of time, they grow a single species. And so that the natural functions of the soil and of the above ground biodiversity are extremely limited. So ours crops are grown into full grasslands that have as much diversity as they wish to express. We use our livestock over the top to utilise that and make a profit of that extra diversity and biomass. But also the grain that we're getting off is inevitably going to be a more complex end product than if we were to grow those exact same types of grains in a simplified system. So no-kill provides a lot of different benefits, and the easiest way to picture it is that we keep on adding cream to the cake, but we don't take away the cake.
Yeah. So what sort of results have you seen off the back of the no-kill cropping system, like in terms of yields for your crop, but also probably measuring the pickup from running the livestock across that paddock as well, eating out those plants that coincide with the crop?
Indeed, yes, a great question, and it's the inevitable and a good question that first comes. So our grain yield will only be, depending upon the year, something like 1/4 to 1/3 of what the conventional crops surrounding us would be. And that rule of thumb holds up pretty consistently across where it's been applied in Australia. It may be different in other countries because there are other people trying these sort of things now. But that's a bit of a marker. The but on the end of the question is that but the whole paddock actually produces 30 to 40% more biomass over a whole year. And that is the key here, that we are, back to that analogy, leaving the cake and we're taking off the cream. So we definitely get less cream than if we got rid of all the cake and had that cream only, for sure. But also it's ultra low cost. So the costs of putting in a crop are in the order of 10% or less from an equivalent conventional system sitting next to it. And so that's the exciting part of, not only you can see that there's an interesting profitability calculation there, but also it takes away risk, because one of the bigger problems of conventional cropping risk-wise is, as soon as they start preparing the paddock, whether it be with tillage or chemicals, you are locked in to trying to maximise a yield, because you have started something that you really can't back out of for that program.
So for this, are you actually applying fertilizers at the same time at planting?
No, we are not. Just briefly, no-kill has 5 principles, and briefly, sowing is done dry, so when the topsoil is dry, not when it's wet and moist. Number 2 is no chemicals. Number 3 is no pesticides. No fertilizers. And 4 is that the sowing is done with straight running coulter equipment. We're not tilling the soil. We're not dragging anything through the soil. We're not turning the soil over. Very deliberately, we're leaving all the soil in place, so all of those functions that are nested in together underneath the soil can remain functional. They're not disturbed when we go and sow our crop. Very last principle is effective grazing management, so that we get enough nutrient return via the animals returning vegetative material back onto the ground, so that crops can grow and thrive. So it's in some ways, a very, very simple system, but its implications are so profound, because now we actually have an opportunity to put the case that we can restore grasslands right around the world, but still retain them for grain production and animal production for humans. But we can maintain something there that is a very, very important base foundation for biology and biodiversity across the whole planet.
Beautiful. So human, soil, and livestock coming across there, the 3 pillars to what your operation is producing for, and also giving back through that soil as well. Have you had, like, over your journey from the 90s, let's say, of improving your system, have you had a few gawking eyes from your neighbours or further afield about what's Bruce doing on the other side of the fence and how this looks so weird, unconventional?
Yes, indeed. We've had many thousands of visitors over this period since about the year 2000. I think it's in excess of 5,000 or so people have visited here singly or in groups. Generally speaking, it's not the nearby folk that will come, but that's expressed as the donut effect. Not much happens in the middle, as being an understandable sort of a thing to happen. But it's really pleasing that the ripples are going out. And of course, no-kill is just one of the things we do. We've implemented many other things, too many to cover in one podcast. But that's what's kind of exciting about folks that are trying to go down a sustainable or regenerative line, is that there are many different avenues and if you like, many different toolboxes that they can use tools out of all of them, or some of them, or just mainly a few of them.
Absolutely. And I'd imagine their faces have changed, or their mindset going into it changed when they hop back on the bus, in the car, in the ute, when they come and have a look. So they must be pretty interested to see maybe what they can do back on their own farm.
Indeed, I guess you have the range of reactions I'd like to suggest, which once again I'm totally comfortable with. For some folks, a change as radical as what we have been able to achieve looks either too hard, too far away, or just completely outside their worldview. So a no-kill crop is a classic. It looks messy because it is messy. there's maybe 100 different species growing there in amongst all this crop. It isn't neat and tidy. So that, from a human perspective, I totally empathise that some people will hop back on the bus and say, well, not for me, because if that's what your heart wants, you want everything neat and straight and tidy and uniform, then this is a challenge, of course, for you, which is that continual juggle that with agriculture, and especially with thinking about regen or sustainable agriculture, we want to let it breed wild, but only, if you like, within parameters, because they're going to be constrained. So I guess the trouble with conventional modern ag is that we've got almost down to a very, very thin knife point. And an example of that would be, think about the reactions to conventional industry if removal of glyphosate is discussed. So I'm not taking a position on whether it should or not, because I just look at it as it's another tool. And depending on how we use it, it'll be manifested in different ways. But there's often a really extreme reaction to any suggestion that should be or could be taken away, which actually indicates how much of a fine point and a narrow foundation most of the conventional systems are sitting on. If they are making a proposition that many of those systems cannot or will find it very difficult to operate without that one thing, then that means the foundation is very narrow. And so to help those folks, it's that sort of discussion and say, right, well, it is narrow there now. How can you help and broaden it? Which in some ways sort of summarises what I've always had the attitude is that the more that we can enhance functions within our own place in a realistic way means that less I have to buy from outside.
Yeah.
And that is broadening that basic function that supports our business and lifestyle.
And becoming a little less reliant on just the one input that probably has the handle over your paddocks come sowing time, whether it come leading into harvest anyway, as we are currently as well. But you've got the no-kill cropping system, and you also, we touched on it before, but dealing with stress within ourselves as farmers, we can be quite stressed out, but also welfare of our livestock as well is paramount to what we do, especially if you're running cattle, sheep, goats, whatever it may be, water buffalo. What has that meant for you, stockmanship, and lowering the stress when we are dealing with the animals?
Indeed, it's a big part of feeding humans, but not from the dietary sort of point of view, from heart and head again. Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really important interaction, and very simple as well. If we're not lowering as much as we can the anxiety that our animals are feeling while they're there, then we're not maximising their genetic potential. It's as simple as that. Or maximising the return on anything that we've invested in, whether it be a pasture or a water point or anything like that. So I've been lucky enough to be involved in the levels 3 and 4 of livestock behavioural work, which is the stress-free stockmanship competencies, which are the higher level animal handling competencies there, but then also developed with Dr. Dean Revell the self-herding whole field of work, which is behavioural change on the broad, which means we're affecting the way animals exhibit their habits in across the whole landscape, which starts to change everything. And so that's a very, very exciting and has great implications for right around the world, really, because when it comes down to grazing management, it falls down to two basic propositions with grazing management. One is population control of whatever animal or animals we've got on the landscape. The other one is distribution of those animals, of however many you have. And that's the part where habits and behaviours are intricately lined in, because they, just like us, are creatures of habit. So if we just leave them to their own devices, they will over and under occupy areas, and those habits will tend to repeat. That's why with grazing management, we've up till recent times, there's just been a reliance on fences or provision of water points and that sort of thing to get a redistribution. Here's another new avenue that we can get animals to choose to go around the landscape rather than be forced to reside in parts of the landscape.
It's interesting. There's a few technologies now, like you can track where your animals are, and some farmers, pastoralists, graziers, are actually setting up their trough systems by the way the animals interact with that said paddock, or if not, splitting it and being able to graze that more efficiently and offering what you say is more watering points for that. So you're not sort of focusing on the one area and impacting that soil in one area as well. There's probably outside value of adding more water points for the livestock.
Indeed, yes, and so if we were coming to a property and I was there on advisory work, I would be saying to that landholder, how do we make the most of those water points that you've installed? Because if we just leave the animals to go and do their thing, they will do their thing, which means that habitually, even out of those new water points, they will over and under occupy areas that have been made available to them. So changing behaviours isn't an either-or proposition at all. It's an overlay. So think about whatever you're doing. If we can positively change animal behaviours to get more of what you want, well, then you're getting a better return on whatever hardware that you've spent your hard-earned money on.
Certainly. Well, it's better to be not as stressed as much, and especially for your animals not to be stressed running in before going to market or something like that, selling them on. But what I wanted to look at was some of the biggest concerns to you, and you've noted down of climate change as a big one for a lot of people out there, and also species decline. What are these two for you?
Yes, correct. I have for a long time viewed them as actually being inherently interlinked.
Yep.
That we really can't in the long run be thinking we're doing anything on climate change substantially if we keep on simplifying the biology and biodiversity of our whole planet. And even though we have individual responsibilities for the bits that we manage on our place, the effects of that, of course, go right around the whole world. So species decline happens at the microbe level as well as the big furry critters that we see. And every time we lose a piece, we lose an opportunity to have function that we could otherwise have. And so by creating systems that still do what we want as humans, but provide the maximum expression of function, means that we're just doing our best to keep the total diversity, because we can't measure everything, try and manage it down to an nth degree, because that's not even the way nature works. It's the connections of everything working together, not just studying individual parts of it, which give you an answer to how those natural systems work to any level. And it's exciting from my point of view that we can operate in the space to try and creatively operate agricultural systems that help with climate change and species decline, rather than it being seen as an opposite, that you can only do one or the other. I've never accepted that. I think that's where we can creatively change, which brings more enjoyment for the humans too.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touching on species decline broadly and narrowing down, what sort of species are you worried about within your region of losing, and what did you want to sort of bolster up through your work and now your platform?
Right, yes. Well, we've done by reinstating more diversity on our place, the grassland, shrubland, woodland layer. We started to see a real explosion of increase of things, and the more noticeable things are, of course, things like birds and large insects and reptiles and other things that are sitting on top of a big pyramid of other organisms that we don't see or are aware of. And so that's always exciting when you see something very large, or from the human eye is anything we see is pretty large in the whole scheme of things. Unfortunately, in the last 10 years, that that's started an increasing decline, and that's due to passive chemical exposures, and that's something that's playing out in agricultural areas everywhere, not just Australia. We do have a serious issue there in general, and we won't be leaving the podcast with a negative, because it's a challenge that we can solve, but we can't solve it if we don't recognise that, in fact, a lot of the compounds that we've been using to enhance production are actually spreading very much further than where they've been applied. And that is a bigger problem than just regarding or talking about the compounds themselves or their desirability of being applied, because they're going and expressing themselves widely. This is uncontrolled experiments in the broad, which are very discernibly affecting diversity. So therefore, in the long run, we won't be really achieving climate goals, because if we're planting trees or other plants, for argument's sake, to address climate change, they cannot thrive in the long term unless they have a full biota with them. They're not just a tree; they've got the full assemblage of everything else. So start knocking out pieces out of this big Jenga puzzle, and sooner or later the whole thing's going to fall.
That's it. It is a little bit of a puzzle, but once you've got that puzzle sorted out, you can find the pieces that suit your area, your paddock, and put them all in play. For other farmers out there, how would they be able to adopt some strategies that you've taken on board? And also probably those ones out there thinking this is all hogwash and a little bit too far afield of what they're doing, and they wouldn't be able to achieve this on their own farm. What would you say to them? What sort of strategies or ways that they can sort of introduce this sort of way of thinking?
Oh, indeed. I think starting genuinely from that end, if we were having a one-on-one conversation, that's where I'd start. Not to convince anybody of anything, but actually to genuinely assist and say, well, where would you like to go, and what do you want it to the situation to be like for your own place, but also your own community in the long run, and your own business. So all of those things, and then let's talk about then things that are useful to you from that perspective. Anything else is irrelevant to an individual, and so for folks watching this broadcast and so forth, it would be, don't just get too overwhelmed by the fact that here I am down a track after some decades doing stuff. So therefore, that can look like far too big a leap. And yes, don't try and climb a mountain without going to base camps first, and where you're comfortable from initially.
Absolutely. I think as farmers, it's better to be comfortable than out of your comfort zone at the early stages of adopting new things, new challenges, new innovation or technology. But for yourself, what's the future of your farming system? Where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I do see quite exciting parts to be added on with the end products of the grain side of things in particular, and that's starting to be taken up by the next generation, who are, in my particular case, are much better on the spanner than I ever was with fixing things. So the complementary and nutrient diverse aspects of the grain production, there are going to be interesting parts that we've started a journey with bakers and even indeed brewers now to explore that. But then thinking about all of the understory that's there on that grassland as well, that's where that is really, really interesting to think about. We've got many other plants there putting some seed into this whole situation, and chaff and other compounds. They're all things that potentially can make it into an expanded chain of products, rather than usually just being returned to the paddock for nutrient cycling, or at best going through an animal. So that's exciting. Not think about that necessarily most of those are going to replace our standard crops. That's not the point, but we use things like poppy seeds on top of a bread loaf, don't we? So there's an example of a little bit of something else makes quite a difference while we're still holding the bulk with our standard products.
Very true. And for your farming operation, what type of innovations have you used, either technique innovations or leading into technology into the 2020 sort of farming? Technology is getting more appropriate for farms in different areas, but what sort of things have you adopted?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I think some remote monitoring and so forth has been very useful. GPS guidance for the modern tractors now, just because of the width of the implements they're taking and so forth. We don't need to do tram lines because we're travelling over the ground when it's at its strongest, when it's dry, rather than when it's moist. But one thing we like to try and do as best as possible in this very technological world is not have a total reliance on those tools as well. That if tomorrow, if the whole internet went down or something like that, that you can still continue to function. Because once again, if we're just getting down to total reliability on connection to the World Wide Web as being our business case, well then, of course, you are susceptible to any disruptions that might provide. So none of us are disconnected from all of that nowadays. It doesn't matter whether it's the shirt I wear or the objects in our house or anything else. There's so much that I cannot make. You can't be completely self-sufficient. That time in history has passed. We are all interconnected, but as much as possible, resilience is about being able to take a knock. In other words, almost back to that Jenga puzzle thing. Can you take out a piece or two and the whole thing not collapse? Then you've got a bit of a foundation.
Yeah, I think that may be the case. And then maybe in 10 years, we'll have to teach the kids actually how to check a trough's water float rather than looking on their phone for the remote watering app. But Bruce, for yourself, before we go, what would be the piece of farms advice that you'd like listeners to take away from this episode?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Wow. One piece. Wow. That's a great question. I'll just turn away for a moment and grab a book and actually show you three books to finish off that I might suggest people could benefit from reading. Maybe the old so-called golden rule: do unto others as you would do unto them, and maybe that is as good as anything. And so just books to sharp is Charlie Massey's book called the Reed Warbler, and it has a further description in there of everything we've been talking about and what we do on our place. This one by Fred Provenza, Nourishment. I've worked extensively with Fred, and he was very much one of the huge foundational reasons that self-herding came about as a new field of practice, and a really great description. And then last one, looking quite a bit thinner, but you can get it for free online, which is self-herding, the booklet that Dean Revell and myself co-wrote, and that's available at selfherding.com.
Amazing. Yeah, good to see another farmer getting into the books and seeing how else and what else can be done for our own farms and spotting the gaps, opportunities. Great stuff. Thank you very much for coming on to the podcast, Bruce. Great to speak to our very first 22 Bob Hawke Award winner.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Jack, and all the best to you and all your listeners.
Thank you for tuning in to the Farms Advice podcast. It is produced by Advertise Digital, the agribusiness marketing specialist. Go to farmsadvice.com.au for more information on this episode and the others before, and spread the farm's advice. If you love this episode, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe, as it helps other farmers find us too. But until then, next Tuesday, keep on farming. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Farms Advice podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.